Hey there, Lead the Team Nation. Welcome back to another great episode. Today, I have for you a fun one with Srini Kouskik, who is CTO of Rackspace Technology and founder and global leader of Foundry for AI by Rackspace, also known as FAIR, F-A-I-R. We're going to dive into that today. He's also served he served as a senior executive for a lot of other organizations that you probably recognize, including Magellan Health, Hewlett Packard Enterprises, Nationwide, and IBM. Srini, welcome to Lead the Team, sir.
Ben, it's a pleasure to be here.
So what's your most memorable leadership story?
Well, as you can see, I've been in several organizations, but I think the one that comes to mind for me that stayed with me is when I started my career. I was I'm still a very strong technologist, but I kind of built my career on being one of the best technologists at IBM. And so when I moved over to Nationwide, my leader at that time, Mike Keller, basically told me, Srini, you got to remember, you've run Delta Forces so far at IBM, right? You had a team of really smart people. Now you're going to be commanding the Army. There's a huge difference in coming into that. And I didn't think much of it when he gave me that advice. But as I went through the next year and a half, you start to realize that the biggest thing that I learned was, when you're working with a lot of really smart people, like, I had about a team of 300 people at IBM at that point in time, went from there to 3,000 people at Nationwide. The difference was, like, here you had very accomplished technologists, and in the other place you had very committed employees who actually wanted to do the right thing. But in one case, you could actually go in and give them the problem, and they'll figure out a way to go solve it because they had the experience to do it. In the other case, when you're commanding the Army, you had to kind of break down the complex task, right? You have to actually break it down into portions that they could handle, build their confidence that they could get that done, so that you can go and accomplish major things. And the add-on to that, like, that I learned was, going from 3,000 to 30,000 people. When we went to about 23,000 people in HP that rolled up into my organization. You go to a different level, right? It's you go from commanding a battalion to really, like, commanding the entire armed forces, where you have to start having generals who can actually understand the battle plan and go with you on it. Wow. And I say that because I've kind of, after all of my stints, like, I've landed in a place which I'm very comfortable with, where it's not the huge army and it's not the Delta Force either. It's somewhere in the middle, where we have 1,000 people or 1,500 people, and I found a style that fits my interests and others, which is I'm more of what I call a practitioner coach these days. Right? I like to do. But but at the same time, that your job is as a coach, and when your team struggles, you're able to kind of jump in and be a player, right? When actually needed. So it's the management lesson that I've learned, which is it clearly is situational. It is different strokes for different teams, but it's actually a pretty cool thing that as I look back in my career, that's one of the things that stuck with me for a long time.
That jumped out at me, actually, when I was reviewing your background on your LinkedIn profile. I'm like, oh, man, like, he has this tech background. IBM, like you say, is the Delta Force of technology, and then you go to an organization where technology, it's an insurance company, right? Like, you need technology, but it's more of an enabler. It's not like the thing that people are buying. And so your workforce, of course, is going to be different. And that is quite a leap. And I think it's a great message for leaders to, one, I hear like you're a guy who's really being thoughtful about the organizational structure and how you need to flex your leadership strategy to fit the team, fit the structure. And in order to do that, that's got to be pretty challenging. But what's been the biggest challenge in finding and sort of adapting your leadership to all these different kinds of organizations?
I actually, yes, it's a challenge, but it's one of the things that I've enjoyed in my career because I call myself a lifelong learner.
Which is the first thing you list on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah,
I'm expecting to see CTO
yeah,
on your title. No, it says lifelong learner.
yeah. Lifelong learner to me is, it appeals to me because every role that I've found is actually different, right? You have to learn the organization, you have to learn the culture, you have to learn how you can motivate that team to be able to go, to deliver and do really good things. And I think if you have just one style that you bring to the to different roles, that could be a challenge. And a part of it is essentially coming in, understanding what the culture is. How do you motivate the people? What do you have around you from a team standpoint, right? Again, I can tell you earlier in my career, I walked in and I expected certain things around me to be able to get things done. And then you start realizing that doesn't happen that often. And then you shift towards, wait a second, there are strengths that I bring to the table. Now I have to look for things that complement my weaknesses, right? So that I don't have any blind sides. So you start building teams that really don't reflect your strengths, right? It actually complements and makes up for your weaknesses. And so those are the types of things that I like, and it is a lifelong journey of learning, because I'll tell you, I've been in this business for 36 years right now. And I'm going to say this, and technologists would probably have would not agree with it, but I'll tell you, I haven't seen a problem that's new in the 36 years. Sometimes I feel like we're solving the same problem with different technologies over the 4 decades I've been in this business. But what makes it unique is the people, the business context, and everything else that you're solving it is different. Because otherwise, again, it sounds like a jaded technology, but it's like, yep, we're excited about technology. We go build it, and then like 5 years later, there's something new. I've got to migrate and modernize everything to this new technology. Right. And then by the time you're done with it, there's something else that comes along, and it's exactly the same thing you're doing again, whether it's database or web or any of these areas. I've seen several waves come and go. So that's why I say the problems are the same. What makes it very unique and what requires things are like the business has evolved. And so you have to solve for that. And then you also have to solve for the people side of things. The workforce has evolved, and today's workforce looks very, very different, and that makes the job fun, right? Like I could do it for 10 more years, and I know I'll be doing it differently as I move forward.
Well, I don't see as many executives at your level moving from company to company, industry to industry, and having such a track record of success. So congrats on that. And it's cool that you're like, hey, wait, it's a framework that I apply here.
Yeah.
And I use that. And now let's dive into AI a little bit, because man, it's coming. And Rackspace, just to sum it up, is like the king of cloud, right? For people, right? It's I don't know if it's the largest, but maybe the largest provider.
We're one of the largest multi-cloud solution providers. Yes.
Okay. So anybody doing anything in the cloud, which is everybody, Rackspace is probably, hoping you succeed in that. But now you've kind of got this second job now, basically, right? Leading the Foundry. What is that about? And then I'd like to work this back to, well, it's the same problem, or it's not a new, AI is not a new problem.
Yeah.
But so what is this Foundry?
Yeah.
What's the Foundry?
As you pointed out, we're one of the world's leading cloud companies. And AI, while there's a lot of excitement about it today, AI has been around for 70 years. 1956 was the first time the word artificial intelligence was coined. And then when I was doing my master's degrees in the mid 80s, my master's degree thesis was on artificial intelligence, right? So it's been around for a fair amount of time. The reason why it's reached the stage it is today is the underlying compute capabilities, the storage capability, the amount of data that you can process. All of those has grown exponentially over the last 10, 15 years, that now what was limited to some labs at MIT and Stanford and others is now actually, it's more democratized right now. So a lot more people can access it. So as something becomes more commonplace, people get excited about it. So it's one of the reasons why we believe that, like, being a cloud company, it made sense for us to absolutely, to stake our claim to leadership position in this space. We chose, you asked about FAIR. Like, I was going through it a few months ago when we were thinking about the name, and everybody else in the business is going out and saying, we just established a center of excellence on AI. I kind of chuckled about it because, like, it's been around for 3 or 4 months, especially the whole generative AI, like, making it available. Suddenly we created centers of excellence somehow, right? So what stuck with me was the word foundry. Like, that stuck in my head, because if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, a foundry was where you had raw materials with some machinery, with some skilled craftsmen who built things that were valuable to consumers. That's what the foundry was. That's what, and that's exactly where we are with AI, right? You have your raw materials, which is all of this data I talked about, the machinery, everything that you hear about large language models and generative AI, things that have kind of become more available these days, with skilled people, so that we can create AI solutions that are valuable to our customers. That's why we picked the word Foundry for Artificial Intelligence by Rackspace, that acronym FAIR. And it actually is deliberately picked to go that way, because we want to promote the responsible use of AI in the industry today. And we want to, again, as I said, stake that leadership position for ourselves in that space.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
There's it's just so important for us to recognize that AI is here, and but how it's used is really up to the leaders.
Yes, exactly.
And what is that way going to be? Now, what's your advice for leaders who maybe work in smaller companies or leading smaller teams? They've been playing around with Chat GPT, and they're like, hey, what's next?
Yeah. Well, so number one, with any new technology, especially something that is as powerful as AI and what's coming into the workforce, it is extremely important for us to learn the lessons of history before we go down this. I told you when the podcast started, I live in Columbus, Ohio, right in the middle of the Rust Belt that people would say. And then, if you go back 40 years ago, 35 years ago, when automation and the globalization happened, manufacturing jobs left this country. And when that happened, we in the white collar workforce looked at it and go, okay, that's happening. It's happening. There's some part of it, and I think that was a mistake, right? Like, again, I think what's going on over the last five years, especially after the pandemic now, is people are trying to bring back manufacturing into this country and build that back again. I view that as a lesson for us, because we're exactly at that stage with white collar jobs and artificial intelligence.
Okay.
Right. What generative AI and artificial intelligence have the power to do is, I'll always talk about the positive. The positive is this: if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, food, shelter, clothing, right, and all the way up to self-actualization. I jokingly call it the Maslow's hierarchy of technology. And you have food, shelter, clothing. In our cases, like, how do I keep things running? How do I fix things that are broken? All of the manual stuff. What AI has the power to do is to get us away from that food, shelter, clothing of technology to higher levels of performance. So you're no longer doing those repetitive tasks. You're not, we love to call it toil. You're not toiling every day. You're actually come in. You can use the full capabilities that we as human beings actually bring to the table, right? So that's the power of it. So what if I don't have to create these lists and constantly keep track of it, but someone's already assisting me on it. The example I use, Ben, is think about navigation, right? And when you go back 200 years and even hundreds of years, people used to navigate around the world with using the stars, using the sextant, any of those things to get around. But as technology evolved, we had maps, right? And I still remember, in the car, looking at maps, which exit to take and others. You fast forward 20, 30 years today. Now, everything's available on your phone, even to the point where if you've got a Tesla or any one of these self-driving things, it drives you to the destination when you enter the destination. Navigation has gone through that same Maslow's hierarchy, from all of that stuff. Today, you can spend a lot more time enjoying the journey as opposed to worrying about the steps that you would take to get to that place. I think that's the opportunity that AI brings to the table. However, the flip side of it is, we've got to recognize that in order for AI to be helpful to humanity, we have to understand that, number one, I have 3 S's for it. Number one, it has to be symbiotic with us, right? So meaning it has to we have to benefit from AI, and AI should benefit from some of the knowledge so that it can take over the toil. But it has to be a symbiotic relationship, not a parasitic one or that piece. That's very important to remember, because in a symbiotic relationship, AI does no harm, right? I'm a big movie buff as well. I still remember RoboCop, right? A prime directive, do no harm, right? So
with the technology.
So that's number one. The second S in that equation is it has to be secure. So you can't, the security of people's information, the privacy of information is very important. The big dialogue going on right now, it's a very important one, is copyright laws and who owns the content, those types of things. So that's an important part of it. And then my third S that I say is it needs to be sustainable, which means we have to take the time to be very conscious about eliminating bias in the data that we're using. So if you're just going to take the data and feed it in, it's going to inherit all of the biases that the data has. You've got to be able to do it in such a way, and this is something I'm very passionate about. The last 15, 20 years has been a boom time for technology. But it also, if you look at it, it's also been it's a time where income inequality has grown, homelessness has grown, all of those other pieces. I think with the advent of AI and what we're doing, we owe humanity that responsibility to do this and adopt it in a sustainable way. So responsible AI to me is very important, and responsible AI comes down to it needs to be symbiotic, it needs to be secure, and it needs to be sustainable.
Yep, so good. And it's so important for leaders to be thinking about those. And I thought the 3S framework's a great way to be thinking about that. And when you're leading your team, leading your company, you got to have a framework to sort of put all the nuts and bolts into. So to me, those are great questions that leaders can ask of their teams when they're considering different AI technologies and how they're being adopted, because I think it's, we want to avoid it, and maybe it already has become, but creating AI as a runaway train where we're just kind of behind the curve. And some would say maybe we already are, but we can maybe slow it down.
Well, I think it's more of I tend to be a glass half full guy, right? And every time technology has been invented, there's always the bad guys, using it for nefarious purposes, right? Whether it's internet, whether it's quantum computing, whether anything new coming in, there's always going to be the good and bad, going at it. I tend to be one of those guys who just says, look, the bad's going to happen anyway. If you unilaterally put your arms down as the good guys, they are definitely going to win. Right. So a big part of it is being responsible, is if we can adopt those frameworks, and if we can drive that, if we can do it in such a way that it is not, like I pointed out, what happened with the blue collar workforce, it doesn't happen to our white collar workforce as well. I think then we're fighting the good fight. Right. And it's always going to be, there's no magic pill that's going to just stop all the bad guys from doing what they're doing. But we can actually come in at it with the force for good and the use of AI for good.
And Srini, I think you gave us a really good way to think about AI. And I hadn't thought about that, but thinking about lessons learned from history and like when NAFTA came on in the US and so many jobs were changed so quickly. And there wasn't really a game plan to effectively reposition people, to retrain them, to employ them in different ways.
Yeah.
And it was just completely, I think, overlooked. And now, we can learn from that. And we know AI is going to displace probably a lot more people than NAFTA. Yeah. And, it's impacting way more people. And it's a chance for us to learn from those lessons and try to get ahead of it. And, I think one of the key successes in all this is the first line of your LinkedIn profile, which is lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And I don't survive in 36 years in technology unless you embrace that idea. Yeah. My question to you is, what in the world are you doing that may be different or unique for some people that say, yeah, I'm a lifelong learner, but they're not able to keep their learning edge to the same degree that you've been able to?
Oh, wow. It's a great question. I think personally, I've always been a curious person. I'm the guy that when Apple introduced the watches at the store, right, and they had the watches on display in the case, I was actually, I literally happened in the Palo Alto store. I was actually looking under the desk. I went to an Apple store, was looking under the desk, and the guy comes over and goes, "What's going on?" And I go, "Well, I know how the charger works on the Apple desk. I'm trying to figure out how you made it invisible." Right, because he's sitting under a case. I'm trying to figure out how you made it invisible. The curiosity piece of it is important, and I think it's critical to be a lifelong learner because you always are wondering how things work or how things will start impacting things. So that then has to be coupled with the desire, like the curiousness is important, but then the desire to say, okay, that's important. This is AI as an example is something that is definitely going to impact us. So I want to learn as much of it as I can during this process. And the benefit of, again, I've mentioned it, like been in this business for 37 years, and I've seen the problem many times before. You're able to kind of build on that knowledge. Yeah, this looks like the thing I saw that way. It's an incremental piece that I have to pick up, but it's not something that I have to start from scratch and learn. The benefit of being lifelong learner, just like with savings, like tends to compound on one another. Like if you kind of build that skill right from the start, it helps.
Do you learn? So there are different ways of that people learn best. Some learn by seeing, some learn by doing, because it's more tactile. Sometimes audio.
Yeah.
What is your most natural or easiest form of learning?
My natural form of learning is going to be by listening. I'm an audio. So
me too.
When I take my walks, that's why I listen to podcasts and others during my walks, and you pick up half an hour, you get an exercise, but you also learn something as you go through it. The other piece is like I have to do. If I can't do, I don't learn. I can explain a lot of things. I can tell you, like there's things that I can tell you about how the light switch works and like how electricity should work and other types of things, but I've never done it. So if I have to change a light bulb I can handle. Light switch, I have to call an electrician, right? But there are other things like fine tuning a large language model. Well, I've been doing that. It's sitting at home and in my breaks and others. That's what I've been doing. That comes naturally to me because I've done it. I've listened to it. I've done it. The other piece, because I don't have that hands-on tactile, sensation, I've learned superficially, but I haven't learned in depth.
So it sounds like there was some ways in your day that you have sort of adapted your learning style so you can maximize it. So like a real straightforward example, which I appreciate, is like you're walking and you're listening to a podcast on an interesting topic. Or maybe you're getting your hands dirty in some way. You're volunteering to dig into some model that your people created because you need to learn that a little more deeply. I appreciate that. I think it's important for leaders to really consider that versus just nodding their head. Yeah, I'm a lifelong learner. Well, how do you learn best and most effectively? And then leveraging ways in your workday to do that. Or else
That's
you could
the
find
only way
yourself locked away in the ivory tower and you're not touching anything. You're just reading newspapers.
And the other tip that I use for myself is like it's different. So I'm not learning this when I'm walking, as an example, listening to podcasts. I listen to things on economics, other interests that I've got, not on technology. I don't listen to too many technology podcasts. I'm really out there. Like, for example, in NPR, there's a really good podcast called The Hidden Brain.
Oh yeah, I love that one. Yep.
And Shankar Vedantam does a really nice job with that. That's something that's on my playlist. Freakonomics Radio is another one on my playlist, right? Where I tend to go in and listen to things that basically that expand your horizons, right? And you go, oh, I didn't know that was there. The hands-on learning that I get, like in the middle of my day, my assistant knows this. She's got think breaks established, and typically in the think break, I'm going downstairs, grabbing a coffee, come back upstairs, and then I've got a Coursera course or I've got an AWS console open where I'm going in and trying something out, because it's like, yeah, I had read that, and when I'm stuck, I can actually flip over and go look at a video right there and then try it out to kind of do that. And again, look, I'm not that really, really deep technologist who will solve all the problems for you, but I know enough about how cloud works and others to the point where it's hands-on. It's not just sitting and talking through PowerPoints. I could, since I've built it, and the compounding effect that I talked about with the 35 plus years, it becomes a lot more easier as you get older.
So tell me again about think breaks. Why do you have think breaks, and what's been the benefit of intentionally putting those in your workday?
First of all, productivity is a big part of it. I really do. Where's my stuff? I don't think if I turn it on, you'll see. There's my acoustic guitar. I don't necessarily. I'm not an expert, but 7-8 years ago, I went out and picked it up. Went to an instructor, learned it, and others. So most of the times, when I've come out of a really either stressful or a very productive meeting, kind of then take a break, go and strum a couple of chords, right? Like I have my Spotify on, I turn it on, and then I strum a couple of chords with the piece. And what happens is you spend about 5 to 10 minutes with that. I come back, my brain's in a different place. I've kind of, if it was stress, the stress is gone. If it was a very productive meeting, it just re-energizes me to go into the next one with a positive mindset, right? So there are times where I use the break, breaks that are set up to kind of refocus my mind by doing something completely different than technology. And there are others where I just sit there and go, like, this is important. I need to go get myself trained on this piece to drive this. I read an article like this today, before I got on the call with you. I read an article on some of the latest techniques to fine-tune how you train AI models. And when I read that paper, it said, okay, let's go figure out what else I can find out about it. And it's important, because what happens is when we have to go talk to our customers, in order to bring AI to the masses, you're going to have to solve for, how do I do it and not spend $1 gazillion on it? How do I do it so that, back to the story I started with, how do I do it so that the army gets it, not just the elite set of leaders at the top, right? Or the technical experts to do that. And this is fascinating. You can see how my brain works. It's fascinating because I think therein lies the opportunity for how you bring white collar workers around, right? What I'm seeing, Ben, with AI right now is the techniques have evolved so much over the last 6 months that you don't need a STEM degree to actually tune and fine tune an AI model, and it's getting there even faster.
Wow.
And why that I view that as an opportunity is like, if I want to make this more, if the benefits of AI should apply to many, not just the select few, I've got to be able to bring that army along. Right? And I believe that when used properly and when leaders actually train lead their teams to kind of learn those new skills, we can make this opportunity available to a lot more people. Again, it's evolving. I started to write down notes saying, like, wait a second, there's a few things we can do here that can help, because it is something that I worry about, like waking up. I'm a eternal optimist. I believe AI will be for good, but it's not going to do much good if in the process you've lost millions of jobs. You got to figure out how to kind of bridge that.
Yeah, so many good nuggets in there to think about for leaders that are specifically leading the AI charge in their company, or maybe they're not leading it yet, but they're going to be after they hear this podcast, because there's a lot of big questions to ask in there. I would want to keep going down the AI path, but I got a few other questions that I want to dive into. You made a post about 1984 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
What was significant about that day for you?
It's actually 1988, the 4th of July.
Okay, I was 4 years off. All right.
Yeah. Well, it's the day I actually immigrated to this country, to the U.S., right? And again, I shouldn't say this country because this is my country. Right? I've been here for more time than I've spent in India, which is where I was born.
And where in India did you grow up?
In Chennai. In
Chennai, okay. Yeah. And how old were you when you came over?
I was 21.
21.
So been here for a fair amount of time. So it was significant to me because as someone coming in, you've got all of your hopes up, and you're coming into this land of opportunity that you hear about. Like, I didn't at that time, while I knew it was the Independence Day, like, didn't know the significance of it, flying in and others. And that was actually very. Every July 4th, I sit back and think about it, because it was just it was one of those moments where, like, you thought about it, flying into this country with $200 in my pocket. That's it, right? And landed in, had a friend that picked me up at the airport and took me in to stay with them until I could establish myself. I still came into for a job, like, but at the same time, you don't know, right? You're going into a completely new country to be able to do that. But again, the good news is I'm one of those millions of Americans where, like, this country has really helped establish yourself and given you the opportunity to have a wonderful life, but also, like, have conversations like this, right? And like, I'm just blessed to have gone through that.
So cool. Yeah, think about the kid with $200 in his pocket coming in on the 4th of July, and now you're CTO at Rackspace. I mean, it's an awesome story.
Yeah, it is, and it's a great. I think it's part of the reason why I'll always be an eternal optimist. Right, this is always going to be the land of opportunity. Right, and sure, we've got our challenges, but which country doesn't?
Next, photography. We were talking about before we get on here. You got to, and those of you that can't, on the audio here, you're not going to be able to see Machu Picchu in the background. Why photography? What drew you to it, and what have you learned as a leader from it?
Well, photography is one of those things. I talked to you about the acoustic guitar. Photography is one of those areas that, like, I picked it up when I was 14 years old or something like that. And, I'd learned on black and white film, which you had to go turn in and wait for, like, in India, it was 2 to 3 weeks to get it developed before you figured out that you ruined the picture and things like that. But, so it was something that I always enjoyed. And what I really liked about it, if I think back to it, is the composition of the frame, right? And really what goes into the picture and what are you capturing, the context, and it has to capture that memory, right? It's not just a picture you take. And I think doing it in an era where everything was scarce, as I said, like, you had 12 to 18 to 24 pictures you could take with the film, and and it was when you did it in an environment where everything is scarce, you tend to appreciate it more. You take a lot more time doing the composition of the shot than others. So fast forward 38 years, iPhones and others. You asked me a question a little earlier where you said, "Hey, just point and click, 200 shots, like, because it's all there." It's not the way I like it. I think, and typically when I go in, I'm setting up very much. So the big difference between then and now is I don't carry large equipment, right? Like, with the phones and what they've evolved.
It's in your pocket.
Yeah, it's in your pocket.
Yeah.
However, what I do is I spend the same amount of time composing the shot. I spend the same amount of time looking through the sieve before I hit that capture. And when I do, I take one or two things. And many of the techniques that I've learned actually apply here as well, because most of the time you're walking, you're just looking in front of you. Sometimes the best shots are behind you. Or sometimes when you get down on your knees to the ground level, you get a much different perspective of the shot than where you are and just holding it up and driving it. I think that's very, very important. It's the reason why I still enjoy photography. But it is also a leadership lesson, right? Because most of the answers are probably not in front of you, right? It's going to come from people that you work with, from around you. Sometimes it's people that work for you. I think it's a lesson that you can learn. And, when you can do something and you enjoy it and it's teaching you something every single day, like, why not keep doing it?
Ties back to your lifelong learner perspective. Man,
well, I've seen many people use that, Ben. I'm very much, I live that, right? Like, I think this is, I've seen so many people use it, and I hope they are continuing to do that. But I continue to be those lifelong learners, because those folks who truly do learn, it's Darwinism. You actually continue to evolve, right?
Evolve, yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Srini, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'll say I've learned some things, and I think our audience has too. And I cannot wait to see what you're going to do over Rackspace and where you're going to take Foundry next.
I appreciate it. Thank you.